Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a special guest with us today. You know him from the show, but here I'm going to read his intro, right? Because we like to give people proper introduction. Guess what? He was a candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in New York's 21st District. He's a contributor to the Huffington Post, which is, I'm sure that goes on the top of his resume. He was a commentator at the Young Turks, and he was an award-winning business reporter that I first got introduced to him over at MSNBC. And he's also a best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author. And he's an all-around sage. He's here for us right now. It's Dylan Ratigan. Hi, Dylan. How are you?
Incredible to be in the room with you. Nice to see you.
All right. Well, you were at our live show on Sunday, so you got a taste of that. That was fantastic. Now, first of all, my first question for you is how have you managed to look exactly the same for the last 10 years?
Because I was born with old face, and so I actually look like this. Like, you know that cartoon with the cigar and the kid, the baby, but he's got like the man face?
Yes,
I was buying beer without ID at 14.
Really?
Like, you know when you're in high school and you're like, oh, we got to find a buyer so we can get a 12-pack for this week? At least that's what we used to do in upstate New York. I was the buyer.
Oh, really?
No
okay.
joke.
Yeah.
And then I was an intern at Merrill Lynch when I was in college, if I'm 19 years old or something like that. But in the suit with the face and I do this, do that, barking orders. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit. It's
that's something.
Basically, any woman I've ever dated has always been dating an older man, even when I was younger than her.
So that's why I picked up on that right away. Like when I first started,
old face.
So there's several people,
or whatever the face is,
that
the
are similar,
face.
right? But then you hit us. But when you hit whatever age your face is, you then don't age anymore.
That's it. I've been 45
for the
since I was 5.
Since you were 5,
and now I'll be 45 forever.
Yeah. So that's it. Because there's a guy, Larry Reeb, who's a comedian in Chicago. He was that way. And he's like, oh, I couldn't, because he's like, I couldn't wait to look older because my act was older. And I was like, you're right, because I always thought he was way older than he actually was.
Yeah.
Anyway, Todd Glass also, right? He was always, but anyway, so that's hilarious that you're aware of that you look exactly the same.
Yeah.
Now, so let me just, this was the first introduction I think maybe I had to you, or the one that sticks out in my mind the most. You used to come on MSNBC's Morning Joe. And you would actually start to tell what are obvious truths to us here on YouTube, but seems like, some kind of, crazy, out of this world pronouncements. And I'll give you an example. There was a big to-do on The View one day between Bill O'Reilly and Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar, because he said Muslims attacked us on 9/11, and that offended them so much they walked off the set. So they were talking about this for, it seemed, endlessly on Morning Joe. And then they asked you your opinion about this. Do you remember this?
Of course.
So here, this is, hopefully this is all set up. Here we go. Here we go. There you are, looking exactly the same. And here we go.
There is a small group of well-funded Wahhabi extremists funded by the Saudi Arabian government to whom we give money. I really guess, listen, you invite me on the show, so what's going to happen, okay?
So you start to tell a fact.
Just a simple fact about the history of the Middle East.
Just a jumping off point that Saudi Arabia.
What is the context of terrorism? Or not terrorism, but of Islamic extremist terrorism.
Yes. Yeah. So if we're going to talk about that, the jumping off point is, what is it? That Saudi Arabia funds Wahhabists, which is now ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Well, it's the doctrine upon which violence is based. It's like, it'd be the equivalent of whatever, any extremism in any religion.
Right.
The violent interpretation of the religion is Wahhabism.
Right. And WikiLeaks even revealed that they used to always say, well, these are just like these one-off Arab Saudi princes or these royal families that they're not in the government. They just have oil money and they're funding them. And then WikiLeaks revealed, no, it's the government that is directly funding these Wahhabi extremist terrorists, which we know as ISIS or Al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda.
But really, it's just another interpretation of religious fundamentalism, right? Which I can run through any religion. I can do it with Christianity. I can do it with whatever. So yeah.
So you're right. You can. And so you start to make this obvious point. Okay, if we're going to talk about this, let's all make sure we're dealing with the same set of facts. You introduced the most basic of facts, and they all started laughing
Immediately.
Now, what does that say to you? Like the actual truth about the most important thing that we've been dealing with since 9/11 can't even be spoken on a news show. And when it does, it's treated as, well, first they laugh at you. So it's treated as a joke, the truth. And now you wonder why we're in 7 wars and nobody cares about it. And when Tulsi Gabbard says something about it, they call her a Russian. So let me throw it back to you.
We live in a world without context. I'm not saying anything anybody doesn't know. More than ever, there's a world with like literally zero context. And so, the only thing is, well, how do you feel about it? And so
Yes.
I'm so much of my journalism historically and even going forward, but historically was really about trying to help people have some context for what is the prelude to the financial crisis? What happened in the late 90s with Larry Summers and Bill Clinton, and how did they leverage the impeachment of Monica Lewinsky to get leverage over Bill Clinton to make sure that he played along to authorize all of the deregulation laws to get that? I mean, there's all these things sort of merged together. And so that was all I was really doing here was, for me, the Middle East is super duper simple. I know that sounds preposterous, not simple to resolve, but to understand the problem, which is really just, you have the North and you have the Arabs and the Persians. I mean, I strip the map, right? You have Iran in the North and the Shia and the Persians, call them whatever you want, but it's one sort of Northerners and Southerners, and then the Arabs, And so this is just a never-ending perpetuation of that battle, if you will, between those two larger communities. And at the and it's like, once you understand that, where it's sort of East LA versus West LA, it's sort of South Side of Chicago versus like it's not that complex. It's just made complex through the way that it's covered, and sometimes
Yes, exactly right.
And so
They make it sound complex. It's not complex. Everywhere you go, it's Sunni Shia. Everywhere you go, it's Sunni Shia. Yemen, Sunni Shia, right?
Everywhere.
Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Sunni Shia. Syria, Sunni Shia.
100% of the problem, not the problems, 100% of the dynamics are driven by that split, but then it gets internalized into...
But then also you add oil and fossil fuels into the mix.
Which just creates a motivation for global powers to be there doing and then add the profitability of the weapons industry.
And so...
Of killing people, basically.
And so when let me just play this again, because this is, I think this,
Can I just say one more thing before again, I looked at it, and I still look at it, but I looked at it as a privilege to have use of that really big legacy American oxygen that is MSNBC or these big networks. And so, because my prior history is not as a broadcast, like my prior history is running corporate finance at Bloomberg and building that news, like I said, from a different angle. I'm a different type of a human in that in that sense, and but I was a participant, one of them, right? Whatever they are. And so while I was in there, I was like, at the very least, while I'm here, I might as well make an effort to explain the truth.
Yeah.
So that maybe we can marginally recontextualize the frustrating, I'll tell you.
But it didn't.
I haven't wrote a book. I was like, maybe if I write a book, then they'll get it. Like, maybe because I'm just saying it, they're not getting it. And anyway.
I think the reason why I have such an affinity for you, or I'm drawn to you as a broadcaster and a person, is because I think I have the similar experience, right? I just thought, well, if I show them. I had the similar experience with Russiagate, and now it's with Trump. Well, if I show them what gave us Trump, they'll all wake up to it, and they'll all realize, oh, so if we get rid of Trump, we still have the same problem? You mean Barack Obama wasn't a good alternative to Mitt Romney? In fact, he was just Mitt Romney? Yes.
Exactly.
So that's the problem. So I feel, and by the way, this message not welcomed. The message of Russiagate is just it's made up by the intelligence community to control a president who they see as rogue and an unfit steward of imperialism, and it certainly helps cover up the corruption inside the Democratic Party. They never have to do an autopsy. It gets clicks for the media. It's the perfect storm. And so I've been trying to explain that here at this show, me in my garage, a nightclub comedian.
It's a fine garage, I might add.
Thank you very much.
It's quite nice to be here.
Thank you.
This is a good-looking garage.
And so you had that similar experience where you would go on.
You and I are intellectual colleagues on some level, right? Like we are colleagues, even if we just met.
Right.
Like we're the filter through which we're consuming the world's information is obviously is at least in this context is similar.
Yes. And that similar experience of doing good work and having it not only not appreciated, but not even acknowledged. Like you
Punished.
You punished for it.
Oh yeah.
Admonished, called Russian. I've been called everything.
Sure.
And a petulant child to a Russian to a conspiracy theorist, because I tell the truth, like you just told about what Saudi Arabia is doing in Syria. Of course, there's other things. Israel also. There's lots of
It's a layered thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the main thing is that there's this natural gas pipeline that Qatar and Saudi Arabia want to send through Syria so they can sell natural gas to Europe. And why does Russia give a shit about Syria? Because Russia sells natural gas to Europe right now, and they don't want that pipeline. So that's why he's that's a big reason why he's buddies with Assad in Syria, and why we are funding terrorists. Well, let's get to this. So let me play this, and then we'll get to it. I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me play this one more time, because this is just awesome.
There is a small group of well-funded Wahhabi extremists funded by the Saudi Arabian government to whom we give money. Listen, you invite me on the show, what's going to happen, okay? So there's American oil money and American guns to the Saudi Arabian government. Those guns, that money to Wahhabi extremist Muslims in Saudi Arabia. The only ones who have ever killed us, them. We are not at war with Islam. We are not at war with Muslims. We are not at war with Afghanistan. We are not at war with Iraq, Iran. It's nonsense. So yes, they hold signs, I hate America. Have you seen the signs we hold? The only people that have ever funded a terrorist attack out of that part of the world on us, on your colleagues and your colleagues and your colleagues 10 years ago, 9 years ago, was this Wahhabi sect. And it is an extraordinary failure of our politicians and our media and anybody else who has an opportunity to communicate information to fail to make that distinction, because to fail to make that distinction is to risk a scale of conflict and a scale of disenfranchisement and alienation on this planet that may be convenient for TV ratings and votes, but is an abomination for the human beings who will populate this planet, and it's a lie.
So when Tulsi introduces a bill called Stop Funding Terrorism Now, and she's currently serving in the military and a sitting congresswoman on the Armed Services Committee, and it doesn't get covered, and he goes on Morning Joe and says that, and it makes no blip, just keeps moving. Everyone just pretends he didn't say it, and everybody keeps moving on. In fact, right now, John Singleton, I forget who was going to now interrupt you or start talking, and he's going to start talking about it in a much more milder way. And again, you have to bring it back. So that's what's actually happening. And the reason why this is so important and relevant today is because what's happening in Syria, Trump withdraws our troops, then Erdogan wants to go in and wipe out the Kurds. But who actually is going in to wipe out the Kurds? It's the terrorists that we've been in bed with for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. That was the majority of the ones going in to wipe out the Kurds, was our allies there. By the way, so was Turkey. Turkey's in NATO. And then immediately, well, first of all, Russia wanted to bomb Idlib, right? Why do you want to? Because that's where Al-Qaeda is. That's who's trying to overthrow Assad. They never tell you this. It's Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, it's Wahhabi terrorists that we're funding. Timber Sycamore, look that up. And so Russia wanted to bomb them in Idlib. Remember, all this was like, oh, you better not bomb. If you bomb Idlib, you're in trouble, Russia. Well, guess what? Trump ISIS leader al-Baghdadi is dead. And where was he? He was in Idlib.
And he's a Wahhabi high priest, basically, functionally. Whether I'm sure he wouldn't call himself that, but he's a derivative of that school of thought.
Yes, of course. Of course. And so now it's obvious to someone like me that Turkey, who really controlled Idlib, said to Trump, if you pull out and let us get those Kurds, we'll give you al-Baghdadi. It didn't slip past me. It didn't slip past Mark Ames. He says, don't expect Anglo-American media to ask why ISIS leader hiding out in Idlib, the al-Qaeda stronghold armed by NATO and protected by Western media think tank propagandists these past few years.
The layers of conflict are impossible to unwind. And so when you look at all these things, you really have to find yourself asking yourself what you are doing in your own life to absorb narratives that are not true.
Yes.
Right? Because my point on Morning Joe was we're facilitating a multi-billion person potential conflict with the war on Islam or with this whole thing,
right,
when really we're dealing with nothing. I mean, in terms of religious affiliations, you're dealing with an extremely small group of people who are leveraging this. And the primary recruiting mechanism into the terrorist network anyway, by the way, is not even religion. You're dealing with water scarcity, food scarcity. They've watched their brother, their mother have no job, sit crying in the kitchen. And eventually you're the younger brother and somebody rolls up and says, are you irritated with the way you've seen your mother and your brother and your father suffer? And well, guess whose fault it is? And then they create a story about who to blame. Typically in America, it's America's fault or whatever it may be. And if you want, you can do something about it. And if you do something about it, I'll also deal you in for some money and some food. And now you just got to take this AK and do a little wet work with me. And we're off to the races. And now all of a sudden it's global Islamic terror. But really it's resource deprived, oppressed human jammed into the corner to the point where they're extremely vulnerable and ripe for recruitment into violence, period, which really I think is the fundamental problem on the earth, much more than anything that has to do with religion or political conflict, which I know that that's why I was listening when I listened to you talk about the imperative for Medicare for all or anything like that. You're observing the obvious truth, which is there's a floor of basic resources that must be maintained in order to have a stable functioning society. And when you pull that floor away, you open up the field for all sorts of violent and destructive forces to enter any society, whether it's the fears that drive the promotion of somebody like Trump or whatever it is.
People don't realize
it's logical.
You're explaining that when people become desperate, anything is possible and bad things can happen and people can go to a right-wing despot, which is happening all over the place. Even in Italy, I was just in Italy, and people, and they start from the back end of the problem. Like, oh, we have all these immigrants now coming into Europe and all. What are we going to do? It starts our bombing of Iraq, which displaced millions of people. Then we moved on to Libya, did the same goddamn thing. We're doing it from Tunisia to Egypt, and we're doing it everywhere.
Which then layers back into the need to control fossil fuels, which then layers back into the profitability of the military system.
And now, which
then layers into those systems' control over policy and government and budgets.
And if you're allowed to say that on Morning Joe, which you were allowed.
Oh, yeah. I was allowed to say a lot of things on that network.
Why does no one else say that? Why does no one else? By the way, I know the answer. The answer is that's not you. You weren't looking to get another job.
Well, I don't.
But most people are. Right.
I've obviously we all wonder that question to a certain degree because everybody's got their own answer. I feel like there are very few people who actually even understand what you're talking about or what I'm talking about. So there are obviously people who are aware and avoid it because who needs it and it's going to affect my career. But I actually think the larger population has no idea what we're even talking about.
That's of course because people on the news don't tell them what we're talking about, Dylan.
But I'm saying the people on the news don't know what we're talking about. It's not. In other words, when you look at the number, if you did a survey of all the anchors and reporters at all the networks in America, and asked them to what is a Wahhabi, what is idea.
Well, in fact,
that's not a conspiracy of malice. That's a conspiracy of ignorance.
But that's
same consequence.
So two things. To prove your point, we just showed a video where a CBS reporter asked Tulsi Gabbard, "What do you mean when you say regime change war?" She literally, that was a question, and Tulsi laughed at her face and so the second point is I was at this symposium, whatever, with a bunch of journalists, Emmy Award-winning people from NBC and CBS and the New York Times, and we're at this
high status.
And I got invited by mistake, and so I'm on this panel, and the guy says to me, and I'm like, you know, you all are pro-war. That's why you work at these places. And he's like, have you ever been in an editorial meeting? That's not how we think. That's not how we talk. I go, no, I've never been in one of those editorial meetings. And you know why? Because you've been groomed since you were in kindergarten to sit in that editorial meeting, and I've been weeded out.
Sure.
Because I don't think like you. You think like everyone else who gets hired at these news organizations. I think different, so I'm not hired at that news organization. Don't you? Did those people not read manufacturing consent?
Definitely not. They definitely did not read
Really?
manufacturing. Of course
so people
not.
who are in the media today and paid hundreds, millions of dollars never read manufacturing consent?
I mean, I'm not going to say every single one of them, but largely no. Remember, television, with some notable exceptions, and there are some, but television as a general platform attracts people that want to be on it.
Yes.
And
Mediocres
people that
like
want
me.
to be on television when the priority is to be good on television, to look good. Mm-hmm. That's what that means. To be pretty, to be handsome, to be funny, to be attractive.
Right.
At its most superficial level.
Yes.
When the bias is to be attractive, however that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the selection process for the most attractive people to be the face of that information is not prioritizing any sense of awareness. And so you have a lot of interns that come in, they're 22 years old, they have the access, and then some percentage of those interns end up as reporters on television, and some percentage of those reporters on television end up as anchors on television, and some of those people that end up as anchors on television find themselves with huge platforms on places like CBS asking Tulsi Gabbard, what does she mean when she says regime change? Because nothing about the entire progression of the career was predicated on any familiarity with anything in the economic system or at the root of the political or social system. The entire thing was predicated based on a skill addressing a camera, looking attractive, and in speaking in a way that is well enunciated with a good vocabulary. And so when it's the same thing with our politicians. We have a system for politicians that selects for the person who's the best at raising money and assassinating other people's character.
Right.
And so when you design a system that's filtering for the best character assassins who are the best at raising money, what you get is at the top of the system, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as icons right now are the best possible fundraising character assassins in the world. And as a result, they're at the top of the political system. Well, the people that are the best at navigating the sort of internecine or the sort of Game of Thrones style politics of television networks, while simultaneously being attractive, or certainly aspiring to be extremely attractive is even better. That allows for, because the only thing you're getting paid for is whether people watch
or not. That's it.
And people watch it's television.
Right.
Right. It's not tele-listen.
Right.
Right. It's and so the image that you are consuming is the determinative variable as to holding on. I mean, listen, that's a whole other thing, but I'm not going to go down that rant. I'm not just going to go on a whole. The human beings love the fulfillment of an uncertain event, but that's a whole other conversation.
Okay. So,
But just to tie this up, the reason you're so frustrated, the reason the people that watch your show are so frustrated, the reason most people in America are so frustrated is because the people that we perceive to be the information dealers are not information dealers.
That's right.
And but that's good for Jimmy Dore. Honestly, it's good for me. It's good for anybody who's in some alternative information provider for sure. Right. But the problem is that the core, but they have most of the resources. In terms of anyway.
Yes,
you got it.
Yes. So and people. So when people turn on the news, they see any news person on any news channel, they think what they're getting is what you were giving people on MSNBC.
Information.
They think they're getting the straight information. They don't realize what they're actually getting is the purest form of propaganda possible. That is, and it's all, they have a nice jib camera that moves around. It gives it movement.
Exciting.
It's perfect lighting. They all have a makeup person. Rachel Maddow wears fake eyelashes.
She should. I mean, what she looks like is the most important thing.
Yes, right. And so, and a gay person, I don't know if you know, they would never tell a lie about a foreign war intervention, or they would never smear a progressive.
especially if they're from Western Massachusetts.
So it's ironic, yes, especially. So it's ironic that Rachel Maddow is basically a beard for an evil corporation, and that's why Chris Hayes is there too. And because a nerd would never be immoral or lie to you at the behest of a military-industrial guy. And
but I would argue that neither of those two people, for instance, believe they're lying.
I would argue that. I would argue that.
You think that they know they're lying?
I've seen instances of it for sure. Well, Russiagate is one big.
You think they know they're lying? I actually think they believe it. You don't think they believe it?
First of all, do you know any? So this is what I tell people. As I say, do you know anybody who won any awards covering Russiagate? I do. There's only one person I know. His name is Aaron Mate, and he's a regular guest on this show. Yeah, so if you were interested in the facts, you would fucking maybe read one of his columns or watch one of his interviews on here. Those people never once brought on anybody on MSNBC, Dylan, that had a counter narrative that could inform their audience. Never once, ever. They stopped bringing on Glenn Greenwald.
They accepted it as de facto truth.
They stopped bringing on Glenn Greenwald in December 2016 and never bring on Aaron Mate or Bill Binney or me or Kyle Kalinske or anybody who has a counter narrative. That's how I know that they know they're lying. That's how I know Chris Hayes knows he's lying and Rachel knows she's lying, because if they knew they weren't lying, they would bring on a counter narrative. They never do it because they're propagandists. And I'm sure guys like Chris Hayes tell themselves lies like this. Well, if I wasn't here, someone worse would be here. So I'm trying to do that. At least I fight a little bit. He got to tell the truth for 3 minutes the other day.
I saw the headlines.
And everybody shit themselves. Like Chris Hayes was allowed to tell the truth for 3 minutes on MSNBC, and the world almost stopped. Like we're supposed to give him an award for that. He should be doing that for 50 minutes every fucking night. He's not. What he's doing most of the time is showing Trump's empty podium while he doesn't cover Bernie Sanders' speech. That's what he does most of the time. And then he wags his finger at Susan Sarandon instead of at his boss who fired Ed Schultz for fucking covering Bernie Sanders. That's who these people are. They are conscious liars. You are wrong about that.
Yeah, I disagree with you.
I know.
I disagree with you.
I know you're much too friendly to, because they were nice to you. It's weird that you had such a good experience over that. I don't challenge the veracity when you say that. Yeah. I'm sure you did. I just think it's weird that you're such a ball-busting truth teller that A, you ever got on that fucking network, B, they let you go, and that you left on your own volition. That is amazing.
It's unprecedented in cable news history. I mean, we used to even joke about it because the only way you leave a cable news show is usually with some sort of horrendous scandal, right? Like that's how that ends.
Like Bill O'Reilly.
Pick 'em. I mean, you go down the line. Like like once you get on that wheel, you're either going to stay there, or if this thing goes down, it's going to go real ugly. A sex thing, or whatever, attack the president, whatever.
Yeah, you got locked doors in your office.
Whatever it is. And that's all anyway. And so, I guess because for me, they allowed me at least a lane in which to exist. And at least I could get recurring bookings on Morning Joe and say things that I believe were relevant to shift the context. And because I interacted with so many of those other people, I'm like, you guys actually believe what you're saying. And you're sitting here, you're like, there is no way they believe that. There's no one in their right mind could believe that. They're not idiots. And I'm like, are these people idiots? Like, how can you believe that? And especially like the Russia thing is such a classic example where if you don't accept that Russia is this global mastermind of hackery and manipulation,
which they are not,
then you have to accept that there's a motive to amplify this, which is driven by the Clinton, Debbie Wasserman Schultz corruption of the Democratic primary process, which then goes to the fundamental corruption of the American candidate selection process, period, not just Hillary Clinton's sort of mastery of how to manipulate it at its highest levels. And then it goes to the mythology of America as a democracy, which is all of that. Once I get to the point where I'm indicting the concept of the mythology of American democracy, I've now really skated outside of the zone of acceptability. And so I damn well better blame the Russians.
Yes. So
right? You got it. What
Chomsky taught us was that the liberal class there, and the liberal class are the people who are brought on these talking head shows.
Yeah.
And they set the parameters for the debate, and you can have robust debate inside these parameters.
Sure.
And so, for instance, the robust debate was how much did Russia influence our election? Then you can have a robust debate about that.
Sure.
And how much Trump colluded with the Russians. You can't have a debate out. You can't go, well, I think this is actually a hoax that was perpetrated by the intelligence community. You can't actually say, no, Trump was actually brought on because of the way the neoliberal class is led. You can't do that. It's only here.
Well, the most dangerous thing in America politically is really the center left. I mean, people think that it's the extreme right, but at least the right wing, you know what's coming.
Yes,
They're easy to see.
that's right.
Whereas,
But when
there's
Barack Obama goes to Flint, Michigan, and takes a sip of the water and hops back on Air Force One, and goes back and decimates a community, he didn't even give them health care. He could have given them all health care just as a stroke of a pen, and he didn't do it. And those people would not go out and vote for Hillary Clinton, and then they say it's Russia and racism. It was the black working class in Milwaukee that wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton. It wasn't white racists. Anyway, this
we go on and on about it. No,
Yes.
listen, I would just pile on and say if the Democrats were able to accept the fact that they were financially corrupted by the Clintons, who took over basically the funding of the
Yes.
entire Democratic Party as a kingmaker across the entire ecosystem to force Hillary into the if the Democrats could accept that they put the most unpopular presidential candidate in history up for the presidency, and reflect on why would we put the most unpopular candidate in the history of presidential politics up, and not look at people like me when I say it and say, well, he's just saying that because she's a woman. Or again, I used to criticize Barack Obama and how he handled the financial crisis or in how he dealt with healthcare. But any criticism of somebody, he's black, I'm a racist.
right.
So the fact that I ran corporate finance at Bloomberg and have a 10-year history deep in the heart of the global financial system, literally, and I completely can understand and explain what is happening in that situation, that's irrelevant. I'm just saying that because I don't like black people.
That's right.
And it's an incredible weapon.
So that's what they call about
to
weapon-
defang criticism. I mean, it's incredibly effective.
So that's when people say, oh, they're weaponizing identity politics. That's what they mean.
There you go.
They're weaponizing